What's good, man? This is the Easy Pinchot Podcast here with your one and only host, Glory Boy, back here with another special guest in the building, Talia, Talia Rodriguez. Nice
Nice
to
to
meet
meet
you.
you.
Nice to meet you. It's an honor to have you on my podcast. Um, and we're in the time period where you're actually running to become the West Side of Buffalo Public Schools school board member.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here and totally value the space that you are building here and happy to talk for this episode. I am a candidate for West District for the school board, and I'm excited to talk about that too.
Most definitely. And before we even start this, y'all go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. And Talia, so tell us a little bit more about yourself. Where you from? Where did you grow up? And we can start from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from the West District. So I am from Buffalo. I have lived in Buffalo my entire life. So the fact that it's not as warm in May, I'm kind of used to. I had
Yeah.
that conversation off camera. So I am very much from Buffalo. I think maybe because it's like school based, we should talk about like where I went to school. So I have the privilege of attending university, and I was one of the first people in my family to do that. So I went to St. John Fisher College in Rochester. I studied political science. I have a master's in public policy from a place called SUNY Empire State University. And I have a law degree, excuse me, from UB Law. Um, Other than that, I'm a mom. I love baseball and food. And most of my like free time, traditionally, even since I was young, has been dedicated to like volunteerism and like doing things that give life and like fuel my community.
You have a lot on your plate. And tell us, because I don't like to ask this question a lot, but I always want to ask just because one day I will become a parent, but just being a mom yourself, how does that make you feel?
For me, it's a great blessing. I tell my son all the time, he's a gift from our creator, and like my job is to just guide his spirit while he's here. And I've just become like so much richer as a parent. I think there's like a lot of different ways that we can define generational wealth. And a lot of times people think economic, but for me, it's really in the experience of parenthood.
Yeah.
So it's just a privilege. He's so funny. I actually asked him if he wanted to come with me because he's very used to interviews.
Right.
And sometimes he does them himself. So
Wow.
yeah, he's 8. But thank you for that question.
Yeah, my pleasure. I mean, one day I'll have my own kid too. So
Yeah,
I like
absolutely.
to get some insight from people who are actually experiencing it right now in the
Great
meantime.
blessing.
Yeah, most definitely. So I just want to jump straight into the reason why we're here. Um, it's I said this on the last episode is that this is one of the most important time, not just for Buffalo itself, but for the future. The reason why I said that is because the people that run for school boards, those are the ones that actually help us have better education, better systems, and all of that in place for the students, to go to the schools and feel safe or just have good teachers around and so on. But as you going to become the school board member, what are your top 3 priorities you focus on if you're elected?
Um, so yes, I love the question. I just want to acknowledge the way you prefaced it. I do think that it's a time globally and also nationally where people within our generations are seeing that political involvement is key, right? In order for us to personally succeed and for the future generations that we were talking about. For me, my top 3 priorities, I would allow like my community to set them. I think a lot of times with policy, we look to kind of define what our impact will be and don't always recognize that there's great changes in front of us that maybe we can't anticipate. So I will definitely leave one of 3 open for I'm not sure to be TBD.
Yeah.
Um, the second of which I would say a lot of what my campaign and my messaging has been is really understanding how the Buffalo Public Schools functions in the lives of the people that it impacts and how can we strengthen those systems. A lot of times, because again, I'm constantly going to mention and always have that the West Side is a place that I'm from because the place itself and its values have really informed the way I understand the world. but like food is a big deal on the West Side.
Or
So
like
for
what's up,
yeah,
bazaar and
just period. Like yes, you know
yeah,
the vibes. So for me, when I think about impact, a lot of times I think about what are the things that we can do immediately to
right,
better our community? How do we impact our students and make those systems stronger? So like literally strengthening what's already happening. I think
right.
in looking at it from a needs based perspective, or excuse me, an asset based perspective instead of a needs based perspective. And then also for third, I would say celebrating the students. So we have a lot of conversations about policy, and a lot of times we talk about the systems, which I did for number two. And I want to remind everyone one was TBD. For three, for me, a lot of it is the people, right? Like, how can we magnify the experience of the people who are really doing a great job in the Buffalo public school system? How can we strengthen the experience for the students? And how can we make sure that everyone who goes into the building leaves healthier and feels more empowered?
Yeah, that's. I mean, I used to go to public schools as well, and
What do you think of the food?
the food was
I'm that's
terrible. We're gonna get
that's
there.
not on the that's not
We're
on the
gonna get
list.
there. It was
I'm
terrible.
literally teasing, but food and food advocacy and
Yeah,
making sure that food represents the strong cultures of the students that make up Buffalo Public Schools is always one of my passions and things I would
yeah,
love to talk
most
about off
definitely.
camera.
I always need someone that's gonna advocate for nutrition because nutrition is what allows you to go throughout that day feeling good, feeling strong, feeling you know aware of what's going on. Because a lot of times, if you're not eating good, you're not gonna feel good. And we're gonna get there though. And get there. So let's talk about just student achievement. I always like to bring this point across. Right now, I don't know, in the United States, like 1.2 million students like drop out, you know, throughout like every year. And that is crazy. That is crazy. And that can also be the reason, that could also be, pointed to the fact that are they academically being prepared for future, you know, school, future college, or for those that will be going to college. But in terms of like just academic itself, how do you plan to improve academic performances across all school districts?
So I saw that question. I was really excited about it because I like to be able to talk about things that I've done. Um, part of the reason I'm running as a candidate is because I had the privilege of not practicing law, but of actually working alongside and a part of a 501c3 that was tasked with helping Buffalo public school leaders to do this. So in some of the buildings that I worked in, what we did was gather all the students together to understand like what were their understanding of the regions. So when I think of high school, right, I think of what are the things that we need to do to graduate, and coming from some of the communities that I come from. So I'm multiracial, which has always been a party in Buffalo, let me tell you. I'm Puerto Rican, Irish, and Sicilian. So I've always been kind of part of different communities that have been navigating the systems differently or have different relationships of power with them.
Mm.
So when I think about my Latino community, I think about the experiences that I had with people in my family and whether or not it was clear to them what were the steps needed to graduate based on the time and also based on what the programs were available to them, because sometimes maybe there were multiple, but just navigating that is really important. So what I did as a part of my professional experience is I called a regions task force where I invited higher eds. I encouraged the guidance counselors and others to bring students who had already failed the Regents exam together to talk about what they could do to prepare for the Regents exams and how they could challenge the Regents exams in January. And for a lot of the students that were there at the time, they were either people who traditionally had not accessed higher ed in this way. Thinking about high school as a path to college, as you alluded, everyone kind of has a different journey. But for me, it's always important that everyone get all the options before they decide which direction they want to choose. So part of the Regents Task Force was a meeting where we brought different colleges in to talk about what were the academic support systems that were available at those colleges. That's just one of the things that I've done. Also in that building, we instituted a program where, you know, cash is very motivating to my students, and a lot of the kids that we were working to design programming for, when they weren't in school, they were at work, right? So
Wow.
when they're like, well, how do we get kids to stay in school and how do we get kids to come to
Give
school?
them
You have
jobs.
to, but you also have to understand what would they be doing if they weren't at school, right?
Exactly.
So we designed a business program that I helped launch with one of the local business associations so that students could have their business curriculum and also their final exams. And this was really important for me as someone who had come in part from communities where English was not their dominant language. So part of their final exam was actually their business exhibition, and we paid those who won. And by a great blessing, that program continues to exist. So those are two examples of things that I worked to implement that were my creative ideas in cooperation with the teams that I was part of at that time to implement, and they worked.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that's amazing because you started preparing them actually for the real world. Like, because a lot of students don't understand that, and they also want that to be part of the educational system. Because me myself, I always wish to go to a school where I'm learning about things that I'm gonna be experiencing later after school. I had a pleasure actually going to Hutch Tech. Hutch Tech, we had this class, basically it was economics. Economics class, we learned more about like stocks, and that is something that's actually major. Like a lot of students later on, they want to invest. So when you learn that at an early age, you actually prepare yourself to, think more about your finances and all those amazing things. So
Yeah.
I
Well, can I
want you
just
to,
add one thing?
yeah, go ahead.
One of the reasons why I thought at that time the business program was so necessary is because when I was talking to the business teacher and others, and especially to the business association who I had to secure funding from to start the program, was like our kids had seen capitalism at work in different places all across the globe, right?
Yeah,
And they came with that experience. So for me, it was validating that there was value in that experience. And then also in very New York style, being like, okay, share it with me. Like, what do you think
yeah,
is a genius idea? And for me, we've always had kids that have come from all across the globe, even some females who weren't allowed to participate as publicly standing on stage. And I always thought that that program really was aimed at validating their life experiences.
yeah, most definitely.
So
Let's
just
talk.
kind of like what
Let's
you
talk
said.
about your experience at Lafayette High School. You
Sure.
mentioned that you worked at Lafayette, and
Off
Lafayette is
camera.
one of
Yeah.
the most diverse schools in Buffalo. Actually,
Yeah.
there's kids from all over the world that actually go to Lafayette, and there's a lot of students that are there, still learning English and so on. Actually, my big brother used to go to Lafayette before. What was your experience like just being there and teaching and educating students there?
Okay, so my nana graduated from Lafayette in 1943, and Lafayette has always been crazy diverse.
Yeah.
So I think its slogan is Lafayette where the world comes to learn or something. And
Mm.
that was its slogan in 19 like whatever. So I think for me, what I did do was I taught JA, which was like this business program, but I did help implement programming, like some of the stuff that I talked about co-designing with the leaders there. It was really cool. It was really cool to walk into a building that my grandmother had attended. It was really cool to stand as a Puerto Rican, to stand in between her experiences. So she was Sicilian. She came in as non English speaking. Her mother didn't speak English. They owned a business, right? She had to go work after school. And I was welcoming girls and people in from all different parts of the world and helping them understand what school was with that legacy, but also observing the keen similarities between their lives, my lives, and the lives of my grandma and the people who were the students there before. So it was definitely transformational. Also, just seeing the strength of students who, had been through so much psychologically, physically, emotionally, and otherwise, and the way they were inspired about school, the way they were inspired about democracy, and the way they were inspired about my country and their country was humbling. You know what I mean? It made me want to be more diligent for them. It made me want to bring in better programming. It made me want to hold everybody to a really high standard because I knew what they had been through or I had an idea of what they had been through to get there
Yeah,
through that
most.
door.
I
Do you know what I
mean,
mean?
I'm not from here, so coming here, like you said, I came here with different. It was like a culture shock. You see a lot of different opportunities. You look back and say, "Wow, I didn't have this. I didn't have this." So now let me try to adjust to this new culture. And I like to also bring up this because we can't forget the teachers and the staff that are there each and every single day to help those students become their best version. A lot of times I always say this, and I will always say this: teachers are your second parent. So when you leave that house and you go to school, those teachers are they're they're there to shape you, to make you look at your future, to help you, think about life in different ways. Some of the teachers become some of your long life friends or your mentors, and so on. So what role do you believe that teachers should play in shaping curriculum and school policy?
Um, so I think curriculum is democratic. I think everyone plays a role in developing curriculum. Speaking from some of the communities that I acknowledged, it's really difficult. Curriculum is public policy, right? So it's like, how do I feel that people should be able to interact with public policy or shape it? And I've always been like as open as possible, right? That everyone should have a voice at the table. I've had the privilege to talk to some of my neighbors who maybe can't vote for me for different reasons, or they're new here, or they're here for a couple weeks or
Yeah.
something like that. And I've told them, I still care what you think. Like, still sit and talk with me and answer these questions, because I'm not the type of person that thinks that participation is only for a select few, right? I think there's been people in the United States, including my grandma, that's worked really hard against that message. So I have a very democratic and plural idea of who should contribute
Mm.
and how we should value those contributions. I also feel that way about the teaching profession. I mean, historically, it's been a female profession. That's because at some points, certain places nationally, it was one of the few professions that women were economically encouraged to hold. And I mean, there's a beautiful legacy from that, but there's also ripple effects. So I think it's really important that we have diverse teachers of all walks of life, and that we honor their sacrifice, because as I talk to the teachers and others who support Buffalo Public School buildings, there's an immense amount of emotional collateral that they expend within the system that isn't always well calculated.
Yeah, and you're a parent yourself, so I have this question for you. Uh, how do you balance parental input? I mean, how will you even balance parental input with professional educators' expertise? When it comes to curriculum decisions. You're a parent, you have your kid that goes to school. You know, but like when you actually become a school board member, how will you be able to allow the parent to give their input?
I would say that if I become a school board member, if I don't, my opinion as a neighbor is that, because there's still like very many steps, and I do appreciate you speaking life into it though.
Most definitely.
Um, how do I feel about parental contribution? The same way. Parents are citizens. The curriculum should be reflective of what people democratically believe should be included. Um, there is, though, certain respect that needs to be had for academic disciplines, right? So, like, I value what parents think, but chemistry is chemistry. Do you know what I mean? And there's not a lot about chemistry that can be changed. So I think part of it is understanding where parental contribution can be most easily woven in. What are those decisions that we really need guidance from the parents? And then
Right.
also informing them and saying, hey, this is what the year's going to look like. How do you feel about this? Are there any questions that you might have? This is what we plan to learn. Because I've always found that my neighbors or our neighbors are always welcome to having a conversation. So if they're against the inclusion of something, or they're excited about the inclusion of something, I think the more time you give them to talk about what those reasons are, the better the outcome is going to be. I do also appear to be a big dork, and I am. But I am very passionate about local history. I am very passionate about pride of place.
Hmm.
And I'm very passionate about students having a pride of place and a pride of their school by understanding local history. So for me, I will say, in terms of the curriculum conversation, I will always push for more integration of local history,
Okay.
because I think that that's really important, and it helps our students better define their student identities.
A lot of students don't know the Buffalo history. You're right. like a lot. Even myself, I'm still learning Buffalo. I mean, I wasn't born here or anything, but it's very important to understand the history of where you are. Because let me say, you want to move to a specific location. You know, Buffalo is the second biggest city in New York.
Yes.
Like, like what's the history about that specific location that you'll be moving to? So that's very important as well. So let's not forget the safety uh, and the mental well-being of the students. You know, because that's the most important thing. And you guys just being school board members, the most important thing you focus on, I know for sure, is how the students will feel. Like the environment that we're providing for the students, is it a safe environment? Is it a welcoming environment? And I'm not gonna speak about this incident that happened in Buffalo. I've seen it like on the news and so on, where it was a school MLK where it's like some students were being abducted, and it became very much like a huge topic, a huge topic. But in terms of like just the student safety, what steps will you take to ensure that schools are safe environments for all students?
Right. Um, so when I've answered this question in the past, I think how you define safety speaks a little bit about your perspective in the world. So I define safety very um, plurally. Again, that's kind of a word I'm going to continue to use. So there's psychological safety, there's physical safety, there's spiritual safety. There's all of these things that go into how does someone feel when they enter a building, and how long they'll stay and what their experience will be. Um, Part of my role as a neighbor has been or was supporting different organizations that spoke specifically about gender violence. Part of my academic area of expertise is domestic human trafficking and violence against children and women. I've spent the last 15 years after law school. I think if that's good math, and if you're watching this and you went to law school with me, please drop in the comments. No, I'm just joking. I feels like a long time, but I've spent
Right.
a long time, even before law school, because I was an intern in the domestic human trafficking court and the domestic violence trafficking, or the domestic violence court. So I was an intern in human trafficking court and in DV court while I
Mm.
was a graduate student. So that's when I say 15 years, that's what I mean. I think I was around 20 at that time. Understanding violence from a societal perspective.
Mm.
How does that play out in our families? And how, as system administrators and representatives, we can use those systems to make people feel more safe. So I'm going to draw on my expertise if I'm elected because this is the area that I've worked in. But more of my expertise is really leveraged on the experience of Buffalo Public School students. So I could sit here and tell you stories about people who have not felt safe in their buildings and why they told me that, right? So when I think about my ability to impact that area, I'd say three things. One, my expertise. One, my own lived experience. How did
Mm.
I feel as a student? Did I feel
Did
psychologically
you
safe?
feel? Did you feel psychologically safe at your time when you was in public school?
Um, I think that I've always studied very male dominated fields. I've always, or sometimes, had the privilege of being one of few Latinas. I think that there's something unique about that experience. But I will also say that safety is something very much like curriculum that needs parental input and that needs community input, right?
Mm.
Like it's not just a conversation for the students and the administrators and the people engaged in Buffalo Public. It's a conversation for everyone. And then I think in reference to some of the other things you alluded to, we have to look at all of the different systems that serve our students when they become victims of violence, right? So whether that's inside or outside the school, how do the systems that they touch as they go along their process interact with each other? And that takes more than the Buffalo Public Schools.
Yeah, most definitely. You mentioned something very important where everybody are everybody do come from different either background or circumstances, whatever they're going through at their homes. So there is a lot of students actually that do come from some of the like broken homes where they're not being treated very well, and they come to school and you can tell that that student is really going through something at home. what programs would you be able to put in place to support those students that's dealing with either trauma from back home and stuff like that?
I think leading with empathy is probably a strategy that I've relied on. When I think about people who are challenged by violence in their home life, a lot of times I have great empathy, right? Especially for the adults who may feel overwhelmed and for that reason aren't living their privilege of parenthood as fully as they could, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that doesn't mean that Buffalo Public Schools shouldn't be an affirming place or isn't a safe place for students, and it is and always has been a place where people have run when they needed help. I think for me, it's making sure that everyone's trained, and training sometimes costs a lot of time. But for me, when we're talking about schools where people are coming from so many different cultures and so many different places, a lot of the things that I thought about or that our team thought about when we were preparing communication is how does this word actually translate into the languages we're talking about, right? So let's talk, if we want to talk about family violence, how does the cultures that we're trying to share our concerns with understand that both historically and contemporarily? And how do we look at that understanding with an asset perspective instead of one of judgment?
Mm.
You feel me?
Yeah, most
Um,
definitely.
so I think for me, a lot of it is moving very cautiously to understand that even if we want to share something and it's out of our best intention, who we're sharing it with and how, even if it's a resource we think is safe, can really impact the way they receive that message or that resource and our
Yeah,
efficacy, our ability to share it or
most
intervene.
most definitely. And I have this question for you because I know you've been so much involved with just the community and students in general. I mean, one of the examples is you've been at Lafayette School. So being at Lafayette is basically being with the whole Buffalo community.
It's
Because
just a celebration every single
it's
day.
like
Like the
so
joy in that
diverse.
building, it's
Exactly.
it's magnetic. People have walked in and been like, "There's an energy in here."
So community engagement and transparency. I like to ask this question because there's a lot of people that do run for different offices and they want to become either you could tell just like presidents, for example. They run for offices. They tell you all of these amazing things to expect, but then later on something different happens. But when you do become a school board member, how will you involve parents, students, and the community members in just decision making and also just increasing that transparency and accountability on the board?
Yeah. So my approach to public policy and understanding that parent involvement in schools is civic engagement. So, like, the question really comes down to how do we engage people in government policy? And how do we make people feel that even if we engage them, right, that their voices are going to be heard and that there's going to then be an action? Um, and I have very distinct opinions about that. But again, and I don't mean to be redundant, thinking about my lived experience, you have to meet people where they are. It's very difficult for a mom who may be a parent who may be navigating the world or even a caring adult, right? Because sometimes it's not mom and dad, it's uncle or older sister, like whoever that caring adult is. It's very difficult for them to navigate the world and be at different places at one time. So, like, maybe you can't be at work and a hearing. Maybe you can't be at work and at a parent engagement conference. So, really, what needs to happen is we need to figure out how can we go to them more in ways that are cost efficient for us. And then also recognize, too, that there's a lot of work that our own communities need to do. Like if I want the Latino voice to be heard as a neighbor, how do I organize so that we're unified? So when we do interact with the schools, right, we are speaking with a voice that's been invested and prepared. And a lot of times that takes work too, and that takes advocates working alongside Buffalo Public. So I've been in the different roles,
Mm.
and I'm like, well, we need to feed people. We need to go to where people are at. We need to use language that they find affirming. We need to speak their language, yo hablo español, but we need to literally speak to people in the language that they best understand. And we need to be respectful that communication styles and how much time and energy we invest in communicating what's going on inevitably needs to increase as the population and diversity and potential of Buffalo Public School increases.
Yeah, I always say, man, transparency amongst parents is very, very important. The reason why I say that is because with that issue that happened here in Buffalo, actually, a lot of parents wasn't aware of it. And when they found out, they went crazy. They said, "Oh, these people are lying to us. They were supposed to tell us that something was going on with our kids." And I feel like they need that. Parents need that transparency because when they allow their kid to leave that house and they're at work, they they want the teachers to, you know, to be transparent with them. Tell them if their kid was sad. Let me say a parent comes to pick up their kid. Tell them, "Oh, your kid was sad today." Nah, I don't know exactly why, but I think you should speak to them. And I feel like that will kind of give some parents some sort of relief. Like, oh, wow, they do care about my kid, And
Yeah, I
so,
mean, I don't make any assumptions about what parents know. My paternal grandmother only was afforded third grade education in Puerto Rico. When it was time to send my father to New York to public school in New York City, she had no idea what to expect and also didn't speak English.
mm,
So like, yes, I don't make assumptions that like parents know the process or that they should know the process. My lived experience has informed me that public school is a privilege that she fought for equal inclusion for because she marched with Martin Luther King, as did many diverse people for like his initiatives and equal rights. But more so that like my lived experience is reflective of the things that you're articulating. Like, yeah, there's no playbook on like how to be a great parent in
that's it.
2025. Like, if
Yeah.
there is one, please send it to me. But yeah, I agree with you. I,
Yeah.
Setting expectations is really important. And the earlier we can bridge the gap for parents, I mean, even when your child is born, like how many days until we enroll your child into Buffalo Public School? What can you do to prep your child? All those things, people want to know. So it is a great privilege to do that. But I don't think people have always understood the Buffalo Public Schools to be this big steward of information or to want to invest as equally into the communication strategies because it doesn't seem intuitive when you think about schooling. But
Mm,
that communication and that shepherding, we had school 353 at Lafayette where we had kids that had experienced school in all different ways and also were impacted by their school in all different ways. And like one of the beauties of 353 was kind of setting the expectation of school. What is school? And
yeah.
we used to have these, excuse me, we used to have these, they had these signs in all different languages. Like when you call someone down to the principal's office, what does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
even for different cultures, even the Latino community, like even the communities that I come from, like that means different things. So there cannot be any assumptions about what people know. And for that reason, there'd be different experiences.
Yeah. Different experiences as always. So my other question, this I feel like this one is very important just because money is something that people do also focus on the most.
Yeah.
If there's no money, there's no schools, in most cases. So like in terms of like budget and resources, we actually began this sit down where we talked about school lunches and stuff like that. And that also is part of the budget itself. But like how do you plan to ensure responsible budgeting and equitable allocation of resources across school? And also I want you to actually talk about also what what do you think should be done, in terms of like school nutrition because that's very important. When I was in high school, I went to middle school here. The food was not it. I would eat just little box of cereal, and now see my friend with another cereal. I'm like, "Yo, bro, you gonna eat that?" Lunch. I'm asking somebody like, "You gonna finish that? Like, you gonna eat that?" Just so because I felt like it wasn't enough. But yeah,
Yeah, I think there's a great feeling nationally from a state perspective and otherwise that there is a lot of economic pressure on our governments, right? But then also a simultaneous feeling that like it's not enough.
yeah,
So I think that what I'll do is look for leadership. Again, you acknowledge that, the Buffalo Public School is like the second largest school district in New York State, or we're the second largest city in New York State, rather. Looking at how are our um, sister districts handling different budgetary challenges, I think is also a good perspective. When it comes to policy, I'm always in favor of comparative policy, right? Like, no matter what the policy issue is, it's how you understand it and like what resources you seek when you're trying to reconcile it for it. So, economic policy tends to be difficult, but there are very innovative things that people have done in different school districts to preserve. There's also a great feeling that, like, maybe we could be asking for help in different ways as neighbors or as other stakeholders in understanding the budget itself, right? So, one of my priorities is going to be trying to bring the budgetary information down to my neighbors and trying to explain it to them in a way that feels affirming to them, right? So, one, comparative politics, looking at what other similar budgets districts are doing with their budget. Two, taking the time to figure out how to explain what's going on to my neighbors, because I've never been in a situation where one of my neighbors hasn't had a good idea or had energy to solve the problem. I think part of it is, who are we calling to the table and asking for help, and how can we have more plural voices and more diverse voices around the table when we're thinking about unique things. Um, I joke with people very seriously that, like, I finance my own education. I come from communities that sometimes are very resource depletive. So, like, not having any money is not intimidating to me personally, because I come from a working class background where you can't assume that there's going to be something available for you, right? So, I think for me, the budgetary challenge is a great challenge. And it's not one that I think I can solve on my own, but I think it's really important that we bring in perspectives that have worked both in the past and in other places. I think what's really important to remind people is, like, even the library here, right? Like, when people think about the library wasn't free.
Yeah.
It wasn't free. It wasn't for everybody.
It
It
wasn't free at
wasn't
all.
built by government, right? The library was built by private benefactors. It then transferred over to government. When we think about school lunches were never historically paid for by the schools. I did a case study on public school lunches. School lunches were paid for by philanthropy. So when we look at this massive school system we have now and how it's going to continue to grow because the size of our city grows and the complexity of education grows, we have to historically remember, like, there were other people who contributed to the foundation of what is Buffalo Public Schools. It was not always all financed by government. So it's a very rich conversation.
Yeah.
And yeah, what was your second question?
So my second question was just, I wanted you to speak more about just what do you think should be done in terms of like school lunches?
Oh, school nutrition.
School nutrition itself.
School nutrition. So one of the things that I saw in higher ed, I always say higher ed, but really what I mean is the high school buildings. One of the things I was worried about, especially for my boys, was like how much water they were getting. Like, especially when they came out of gym. I was like, how much water are you getting? And
Yeah, I don't miss those school fountains. I don't feel, one thing I always realize, like, do they clean this stuff?
But I mean, I think the other thing too is, like, nutrition is many things. Like, it's food, it's water, it's, a lot of other factors. So I think part of it is looking at, again, who are the students and what are their dietary necessities outside of the school, and how prepared are we to meet those within the system. But one of the things that I saw that was really powerful was students growing their own food. I mean, my students, especially the ones at Lafayette, knew how to grow
So they'll
food.
grow food behind, like,
They
in
were
the back of
they
the
were
school?
expert farmers, period. And it
Wow.
was so funny because we had this like robust garden club, and everyone was like, "Oh, we have these 16 beds." I'm like, "Yeah, well, these kids know, like, our neighbors know what they're doing. Like, let them cook. You know what I mean? Like, let them
Oh, so
plant
they
their."
will grow
Yeah,
the food
we
and
had
cook it.
16 garbage. We had 16 garden beds.
So they will
Like, they would literally grow the food
and then cook it.
and cook it. right?
Wow.
And share amazing
Who
food,
wouldn't who
right?
wouldn't know that though? Because the way Lafayette is built.
It's by the side. It's just like right in
Okay.
the corner. It's right in the corner.
Sometimes I'm like, what?
Yeah, and I mean that wasn't my unique idea. It was there, but I think for me, those are the moments when I was most inspired about what was possible in
Right.
terms of nutrition and using food as a unifier for cultural expression was like the garden.
Mm.
But I did have the privilege of working alongside and as a part of multiple K-8 buildings and other high schools. So go Violets, but like that was a really important time of learning for me that helped me prepare myself for considering myself as a candidate because even though Latino kids represent, I think, like a third or more than 20% of the national public school population, only 3% of school board members are like Hispanic,
Mm.
right? And within that, I'm also a woman, and within that, I identify as like Latina. So, you know,
Wow.
it's been a privilege to be a candidate.
Yeah.
I've said some really crazy stuff to people at door
No, no,
to
no.
get them to understand how serious I am about this opportunity and this privilege to speak on behalf of my community and the people who have invested in me and the student experiences that I've learned from.
No, most definitely. Like that's what I feel like people want to meet the real you. Like when you're transparent, when you tell people exactly this is me, I'm from here, my background, my experiences. I've been in the Buffalo public schools, and I've actually you actually went to public schools as well.
Yeah, I went to Buffalo
So it
Public
makes it
School for
gives
a
people
time.
some sort of hope, like, oh wow, like she been in my shoe as well. Like she probably understands me maybe better than the other candidates. I think that's very important to to be so much open to people. But like my last question is, when you do win, right?
Speaking life into my candidacy, thank you,
Hey,
sir.
I always, that's just me personally.
I
Like I always
appreciate
speak
it.
life into everything,
Yeah, and
as
I'm
long
sure all your
as
guests.
most definitely. So like, what is, how will you define, you know, just that feeling yourself? Like, I mean, how would you define that feeling when you do win? How will you define your feeling and just like just winning that, that biggest achievement I can say in one of your biggest achievement in your life?
I think the biggest achievement in my life will always be my son. And I don't want anyone to mishear that there's any level of power that could make me feel otherwise
Mm.
or representation, right? And not because I'm saying that you're insinuating that, but because it's traditionally not a place that mothers go to candidacy. So I want everyone to know, like, that he's my biggest deal,
Most
and I'm sure
definitely.
your mother feels the same way,
Oh
right?
man.
Like, if your mom was here, she would grab this mic and be like, "Me too."
Yep.
I think so. I don't mean to be so serious about that, but I really feel that this is a great conversation, and I felt like I needed to say that out loud. And I'm excited about your audience hearing that. Okay, so how will I feel? I think I'll probably be transported instantly back into the seat of when I was in first grade and I was struggling to learn how to read. I struggled to learn how to read. I felt so vulnerable. And to now be in a place where if I'm elected, I'll be able to represent kids of all abilities, kids who have had all experiences. I think it'll do you know what I'm saying? Because I still remember that kid inside my brain. So I might just be like, kid, I think we made
Yeah. We made it.
it.
Most definitely. But Talia, I wish you all the
Thank you
best.
for this privilege.
Yeah, most definitely. I appreciate you for coming through. I know you're a very busy woman. You're going door to door, having people sign the
Well, you were
petition.
very prompt. You and your team was very prompt.
Yeah,
So I appreciate that.
most definitely. Thank you once again. Guys, go ahead and subscribe on this podcast. Like I said, I will always bring all different types of guests. And this is the time that we're in Buffalo. It's the time to vote. Go out there, vote for who you feel it will be able to represent you. And also go ahead and follow Talia on
Yeah.
all her social
Talia for
medias.
BPS. And if you're not already registered to vote, sign up.
Most definitely. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Peace.